Welcome to I believe it's our sixth session of our study in Acts. Today we will be looking at the last part of chapter 4, verses 36 and 37, and then through verse 11 in chapter 5. As you know, the chapters and divisions in the Bible were late addition, and sometimes the conversations were not correctly um, marked by chapters. And the last two verses of chapter 4 actually belong to the narrative in chapter 5. And so we'll be looking at the topic accountable and the life of Barnabas uh, and others that join him in making gifts to the church. Let me first mention that you see this is designed for a small group Bible study, and I suggest that a person have various different kinds of accountability groups. And I would say that uh, the small group that I'm a part of at my church is a very important part of a number of accountability groups that I engage in. Accountability is so important and it's very well demonstrated in the lives of the characters we will study today. First, we want to look at Barnabas. He is the first exhibit as presented as if a lawyer is presenting a case in court. And so Barnabas becomes our first exhibit, our first example. And his example of accountability and sharing is quite a contrast to the next one we will see as a part of this contrasting accountability, calling us to be accountable. He is identified as first a Levite. And you recall that in the book of Leviticus and the Old Testament, we find that there was a tribe of Israel that was designated Levites, but they were not given land in Israel as the other tribes were. They were not to own land, and there were many other specific things that they would do because their life was to be a life of service. And so Levite was from the island of Cyprus. That's where he was born. Look at all the designations that he was given. He was Joseph and then identified as a Levite born on Cyprus, also called by the apostles Barnabas, and that being translated means son of encouragement. If you grew up in the South, as I did, it was common to give one another nicknames. And through the years, I've always said if anybody added a title to my name, they did not know me at all. And if they called me by my first name, James, that also meant that they did not know me very well. If they call me by my initials, which is what I go by, then I know that they know me fairly well. But then if they call me by my nickname, Dub, which was given to me by my classmates in grammar school, then I know that they know me very closely. And so this was how Barnabas was identified. If you have read the Jan Karen series, you know that Father Tim in the as a character in the book At Home in Mitford was a parish priest around which many of the stories center and circle around him. He named his dog Barnabas because if you know the nature of a dog, whenever they greet you, they don't just greet you by wagging their tail, they greet you all over. And he knew at the end of every day when he returned home that there would be a greeting from Barnabas, who would greet him unconditionally and welcome him back home. Let's look at some of the functions and works of the Hebrew Levite. There were 12 tribes. Levi was one of them. The Levites hold a special status and distinction in the Israelites' religious and cultural life. They are traditionally regarded as descendants of Levi, the third son of Jacob and Leah. Here are some of their functions. They had priestly functions, that is, attended things in the temple, that is, doing the various kinds of services that were held in the temple that a priest would do, that is, a Jewish rabbi or priest would do. Then they had duties, which sounds a lot like what I did as a pastor, and not necessarily the first one, but they guarded the sanctuary. And I guess in some ways I did that because I made sure that it was protected and things were clean, etc. They were responsible for preparing the offerings, and they were given the responsibility of singing and playing instruments during services, and they assisted the priests in their duties. But also, the third responsibility is the one that I think is most important in considering how Barnabas fits into this story as a Levite. That is, they had the responsibility of teaching moral correctness. I don't know all the ways they did that, but that was one of the important things that they did, to set the standard high and the bar high in order to say that you are to be a person of character. They not only taught it, but they also were expected to walk it, to live it out in their life. But then they had the other simple things to do, like transportation and maintenance. I'm sure they're the ones that call Uber and call the contractor to come and take care of the things at the temple. Not They did it themselves. And of course, it was not an Uber, it was a camel or a donkey or a chariot, whatever. But they had that responsibility. But as Levites, they did not have the land inheritance as other tribes, but they lived in Levitical cities that were throughout Israel, and they were sustained by the tithes and offerings from the other tribes, and their primary focus was on serving God and the community. So that oriented Barnabas to be not a taker, but a giver, a contributor, one who did not necessarily just think of himself, but he thought of others. And he did not have it in his heart to deceive anybody regarding the gift that he gave. He was one who was an encourager. When I think about encouragement, I have several stories I want to share with you. He was a sacrificial giver, but he also was one who was a trusted leader, but then he was an encourager. In one of my congregations over a 60-year ministry, I had an older lady who loved to cook. She was just a delightful person. Every Wednesday night, she invited us over to her house for a meal one night and shared with us a ministry of how she made aprons and gave those away, and had a lovely poem about her work giving these aprons to others. She was a person who adorned the apron and served other people. As a matter of fact, she locally was a Kmart greeter long before Walmart and Home Depot had greeters. She was there to declare the blue light special, and that was something that she used later. But every Wednesday night after I came home from a day of serving my congregation and holding the Wednesday night services, there was always a message on my phone. She seemed to wait until I was not there so she could call and leave a message. And I could count on it every Wednesday night that I would go and the phone would be blinking and there would be a message from her simply saying, I want you to know that there is somebody somewhere who loves you. And basically, that was her message week after week. But I could count on it. It was a word of encouragement. But she also was a delightful person in some of her ways, and she grew accustomed to the blue light special at Kmart. And not long before her death, she went by the local funeral home and was made arrangements for her funeral. And she was in her early 90s at the time, in good health, and there was no indication that she was sick. But she, in a smart way, went by there and made that decision and engaged what her services would be. A few weeks later, as she passed the funeral home, that blue light special came up in her mind, and she stopped and she said to the person that she had engaged to make her arrangements. She asked that question that the blue light special uh, created, and she said, "Do you all ever put your funeral services on sale?" And of course, they did not, but it's always been a story that I love to tell and one I love to remember because she, along the way, is one of many encouragers that I have encountered. And I say that my life has been rich with wonderful people. Most of the people that I have worked with have been great and wonderful people. There have always been a few curmudgeons along the way, but mostly good, encouraging people. And he was, as I've indicated, a Levite. Often that is overlooked in the study of this particular passage, but I think it had a great bearing on why and how Barnabas made his contribution. As we said already, he was a Levite. He was and encouraged he lived up to his name. But again, he owned the field apparently in some of the region outside of Israel. It was his. He could do anything with it that he chose. But he chose to sell that piece of property and bring it and give it to the apostles. Now, you remember the communal idea was that the early church had all things in common, not a requirement, but voluntarily they had that compassion for one another. He owned it. He chose to sell it and to bring the money and to give it there to the apostles. Obviously, he was a man of great generosity. Now, the generosity of Barnabas is seen in his example. It's seen in his giving freely. Dr. Carl Menninger, who was a great psychologist, observed that whenever we focus on helping others, it can be the best remedy for our own troubles. Generous giving has a way of routing out the tough old miser within us and freeing our spirits. And generosity breeds happiness. I remember a story of a woman who lost her husband and was grieving desperately. And her desperation made her feel as if she was having all kinds of physical illnesses. So, on a regular basis, she was visiting her doctor, but the doctor could never find any reason for her visit. Finally, one day, he said, "What do you do with your time?" And she said, "Well, I come to see you. I have flowers in my car. I go by the grave and place those fresh flowers on my husband's grave. He said, next time you come, please bring the flowers in. So the next time he came, he said, I want to give you the names of people who are a part of my practice who are very sick. Would you take these flowers and give them week by week to someone who is in great need because of their health? This woman began to carry those flowers, and soon she had fewer and fewer visits with the doctor because he recognized and she finally understood that whenever she focused her attention on other people, her generosity and well-being completely changed as a result. Perhaps you have heard of what is known as the monkey trap of greed, but it also could be called the money trap of greed for humans. In the jungle, the bait will be placed in a cage, and whenever the monkey comes, they'll put a banana in the cage, and whenever the monkey comes, it wants the banana so badly that it will reach in with both hands and arms on each side of the cage and grab the banana. But whenever the monkey grabs the banana, he will not let go of it because he has it in his grasp and will not let go of it. And so, therefore, because of his greed and unwillingness to let go, he is easily trapped. Well, it's easy for us to take the bait of sin and be unwilling to let it go. And we find ourselves holding on to that sin. And like the monkey, we are easily captured by the monkey trap of greed or the money trap of greed for the human beings. We are baited, we are unwilling to let go, and we have that spiritual downfall. It traps us so easily. And that's what happened to the following characters. But after leaving Barnabas, the one who gave so generously, but a man named Ananias with his wife Sapphira sold a piece of property. It was their property, they owned it, but they had heard about all of the compliments and the notoriety of the generosity of Barnabas. And so they wanted that same kind of recognition. So they chose to do what he did. But however, when they sold their property and got the proceeds, Ananias kept part of the proceeds with his wife's knowledge. You would say that it was a conspiracy, it was a common plot. And they brought the portion of it and laid it at the apostles' feet, apparently indicating that they had brought all the money rather than just a part of the money. It would have been fine if they had simply brought just a part of the proceeds, but they implied and suggested that they had brought everything and they laid it at the apostles' feet. Ananias, Peter asked, why has Satan filled your hearts to lie to the Holy Spirit and keep back part of the proceeds of the land? We know that Satan has been called the father of lies, and Satan can fill us with a small lie and it becomes a bigger lie, etc. I can recall as a boy, one of our pastimes was fishing on a close by lake, but also the creek. Wherever we could find a place to fish, we were found fishing. As we fished one of our neighbor's ponds, he always had set hooks for catfish. We noticed that there was a cane pole being pulled across the edge of the lake, close enough that we could reel it in ourselves, and it had a very large catfish on it. Well, we took that catfish, and it was a prize. We was always honored when we brought some fish home. Well, we decided that I would be the one who actually caught the fish, and my two brothers were a part of that plot. Everything went well as we sang the song, "He's a jolly good fella," etc., on the way home, and I was feeling good. But as we got home, I don't know exactly what happened, but the plot began to unravel when my brothers got ornery with me and cross with me and began to tell how we caught that fish, and that lie unraveled. And I was like Ananias, I was caught in the childhood lie of catching a fish when actually I took the fish from someone else's pole. Well, Ananias was filled with lies, not because it was because he lied, and he not only lied, but he lied to the Holy Spirit, which is one of the Trinity. So actually, he was lying to God. And then Simon Peter talks to him and indicates to him, he said, "Wasn't it yours? It was yours land. You possessed it. It was yours. You could have kept it. You could have kept part of it. Simply, all you had to do was to say that I sold my property. I've disposed of it, and I've bought some of it, but I've kept some for myself. But why is it that you planned this thing in your heart? You have not lied to people, but you have lied to God." How many of us have fallen into that trap of believing the lie that Satan plants in our heart, and we find ourselves like the monkey and like all men who are greedy? We find ourselves caught in the trap of greed and ultimately making lies, as occurred here. Then in verse 5, we find that there was a harsh punishment that came when he heard harsh punishment came. We go back. When he heard these words, Ananias dropped dead, and of course, great fear came on all who heard. I'm sure that these people were wondering who is going to be next. And so great fear fell on them. Then the young men got up, wrapped his body, carried him out, and buried him. Now, it may not be that our lying or our greed will cause us to drop dead physically, but it can certainly cause our character to be dead, and people will look upon us not as a person of character and honor, as was Barnabas, that son of encouragement, but they will see us as the rest of the world that they encounter every day. The Christian community should be head and shoulders above the materialistic world we live in. And this is an example, Exhibit B, of what happened with Ananias when he lied about how much he was giving. I like to remember how the woman who had little or nothing brought all that she had and gave to Jesus. She gave not out of her abundance, but she gave out of her want. She did not give just a little, but she gave it all. That's what God is calling upon us to do, to give our all to Him. Someone has said we ought to remove the song that says, I surrender all, because there be so many of us like Ananias that would be dropping dead because we have not surrendered our all. But here the plot continues to thicken with his wife Sapphira. How many of you named your daughter Sapphira? Now, it's a wonderful name, and I know have heard of people having that name, but because of her character, not many people would choose that name. But only a short time after she made this decision, about 3 hours, verse 7 says, his wife came in, not knowing what had happened. She didn't know about Ananias' death. And Peter questioned her. He said, tell me, did you sell the land for this price? And he named the price. And she answered in the positive. She said, yes, for that price. When Peter said to her, what did you agree? Why did you agree? That is, why did you agree with your husband Ananias to test the Spirit of the Lord? And as soon as she made that comment, he said, look, the feet of those who have buried your husband are at the door, and they will carry you out. Instantly, she dropped dead at his feet. When the young men came, they found her dead, carried her out, and buried her beside her husband. And then great fear came on the whole church and on all who heard these things. I'm sure that they began to look over their shoulders and wonder who is going to have this happen to them next, who is hiding some sin in their life that is going to be revealed when they fall on the floor. Well, let's examine what this lesson really helps us to understand. First of all, the greed of Ananias and Sapphira. They wanted the prize without the price. That is, they wanted to have the same reputation and admiration for generosity as did Barnabas. But they were not willing to pay the price. That is, they kept back some for money for themselves, pretending that they had given it all. There's always a high cost of lying. Their sudden and swift death demonstrated the gravity of this sin against the Holy Spirit. Deception and greed deception and greed have a high price as they learn in their peril. Also, people are enslaved by their greed, by their possessions, grabbing all that they can. We know the illness of those who are called hoarders, and there are television programs that are making a lot off the illnesses of other people as they try to help these people or show ways that they can get over this hoarding mentality. And then, of course, the toll of lies always is enormous. It catches up with us both physically and spiritually. Annas and Sapphira's deception was exposed. They kept back the proceedings. They were confronted by Simon, and there was sudden judgment that came to them. How do we apply this, and how are we accountable in our own lives? Well, we are accountable at the workplace, and we ought to be honest in all those things we do daily as we work. We are accountable in our family to make sure that we have the rules and expectations for not only our children, but for ourselves as well. I thought my mother had one of her favorite expressions was, don't do as I do, but do as I say do. And she always responded to us when we caught her doing the things that she told us not to do. There's got to be a connection between our talk and our walk, but also in the church. I know that the church is made up of humans who have accepted Christ, but even humans like Ananias and Sapphira make terrible decisions. Those I read conclude that Ananias were people who were followers of Christ, but because of the nature of sin, it pulls us back into that deep, dark hole. And even though they were saved, their behavior was not in keeping with what it should have been. Personally, I like the definition of character. Character is what a person does when nobody is watching. But we have to know and have to realize that God is observant of all things that we do, and there is nothing that we can hide from Him. You recall this is the very lesson in the very beginning in Genesis, whenever God confronted Adam and Eve with their sin. They found fig leaves to hide behind. They went into the deepness away from God, and the voice that once called them and warmed their heart, drew them to Him, was now one that created fear. And whenever we go outside of those bounds in our personal lives, we will find the same thing occurs with us. How do we apply accountability? Well, first of all, I think we need to examine our motives. There are some people who, when they give large contributions, want to be acknowledged for having done so. Recently in a church, I heard the pastor announce that someone had given $1 million to the church. But to this day, no one knows who made that contribution. And to me, that's the way our contributions should be done. We need to know and call on ourselves to be accountable in regards to how and why we give our time, our money, our resources, wherever we give it. If we are giving it in order to be further remunerated somehow in recognition, we are reminded that whenever we do those things to be recognized by man, and we get a recognition and we get an applause, we have our reward. That's all we get. And so we are to examine our motives. We to embrace discipline. In our accountability, we have the opportunity for growth, and growth, not just punishment. We have the opportunity to grow in Christ. And then we are to extend grace and offer forgiveness and restoration when others fall short, as God does for us. That ought to be our mindset. How do we apply these lessons? We need to always remember that motives matter. We are to reverence God when we come and offer whatever, if it be in worship or whatever. And then we ought to discipline ourselves and offer restoration to others. Ananias and Sapphira are quite a contrast to Barnabas. One was a sincere contributor. The others wanted recognition and were willing to lie in order to get it. We need to find groups that hold us to that standard. Accountability groups that when we are seen walking outside of the straight and narrow way, that group is loving enough that they will call our hand on such behavior. I think this is what the lesson helps us to do, to realize that what is in our heart is going to be revealed. And if we try the idea of deception, we are going to be in a trap like that monkey trap, and we're going to be hostage to that. I hope you've enjoyed this lesson, and I hope these resources will be helpful to you. Until later, take care.